Hello, denizens of the night. Welcome to Carnophage. I am Ignacio Talis, and in the months following my World of Darkness Iceberg videos, it has become apparent to me that I have missed all sorts of dumb trivia. With the same mindset that made me want to cover damn near every fan splat in the second part of the Iceberg, I decided to revisit the setting to explain some of these additional details. I also have a bit more chronicle stuff than last time, and while that was never my specialty, I'll do my best. With all of that out of the way, strap in as we revisit the murkier waters of the World of Darkness. As the Hollow Earth is one of the most bizarre conspiracy theories, which is also one of the more well-known ones, naturally it found its place in Mage Ascension as a complex of umbral realms sitting beneath the Earth's surface, rather than parallel to it as most are. This is where its alternative name of the Inner Umbra comes from. For whatever reason, it's also very easy to enter through various subterranean openings, most of which are closed off by the Void Engineers. The realm itself seems to operate as a haven for the lost parts of our world, so you can find extinct animals, plant life, and even cultures. It has also been troubled by conflicts between Aetherites, genetically engineered biodrones created by the Aetherites, Void Engineers, Nazis who fled to Hollow Earth after World War II, and the native inhabitants. The Knocker changelings have also poked their head in, and apparently this realm is also mentioned in the original Stargazer Tribe book, but I have not been able to get a hold of this book, so I don't know what to make of that. The whole thing is pretty balls to the wall, which doesn't make it terribly interesting to me, but it certainly has its place in the chaos of Mage Ascension. It seems that it didn't make the cut for 20th anniversary, but most of the information can be found in the source books for the Sons of Aether and the Void Engineers, along with the Book of Worlds. So White Wolf was founded in the great state of Georgia, and the ability to research beyond your own backyard was a little limited in the 90s. That's how you get a misconception such as in A World of Darkness, where the city of Venice supposedly has a skyscraper for the Giovanni clan, when the city prohibits building structures like that due to the terrain. That's also how we get a lot of the Kindred of the East stuff. Anyways, some people have assumed that a similar thing was going on in New Orleans by night, when it mentions trains and underground railroads, when the city doesn't exactly have the terrain for a subway system because it's placed in a geographic hole. Looking a bit more closely though, the book isn't talking about a subway system, but rather the historical Underground Railroad, which helped free slaves during the mid-19th century and was in fact a group of people. The actual methods of transportation are mentioned early in the book and do not mention a subway system. A little known part of the classic World of Darkness is that Prometheans, by that specific name, were actually part of the setting, specifically in Mage the Ascension. They are generally tied to the Aetherites or the Progenitors, and made their first appearance in the first edition Sons of Aether tradition book. Here we get a kind of true story debacle for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, as the minor character of Dr. Waldman is revealed to be a son of Aether who indirectly had some influence on Shelley. It also presented an awakened artificial human as a player option. The Storyteller's Handbook would call these artificial humans Prometheans, and provided rules for creating one and the various stances the awakened factions have towards these creatures. In Convention Book Progenitors, we learned about the so-called Promethean atrocities, where several progenitors took part in grave robbing to create Prometheans. Its discovery was an embarrassment to the whole convention, and they executed purges of these Prometheans. After the Order of Reason became the Technocratic Union, attitudes towards these creatures have softened, but there's very little enthusiasm for creating classical Prometheans in favor of clones. So yeah, these creatures did appear in Mage the Ascension, but they've never gotten much focus, and basically none of the stuff we see in Prometheans they created is relevant here. Stede Bonnet was a real pirate of note during the Golden Age of piracy, known for his atypical background as a wealthy landowner from England who managed to get wrapped up with people as infamous as Captain Blackbeard. In Blood Dim Tides, both figures are featured with Blackbeard becoming a renegade race, while Stede Bonnet was embraced by La Sombra vampire and survived the hanging that killed him in real life. In the Modern Nights, Bonnet sails the seas as an elder vampire with no sect allegiance. Queen Ananasa is the only child of the Weaver and created the Anansi were-spiders with the help of the Spirit Spider. While one might want to believe that the Anansi serve the Weaver in the same way that the Black Spell Dancer serve the Worm, and many Garu believe they do, the Anansi actually serve their queen Ananasa. Going back to before the War of Rage, Ananasa was captured by the Maddened Worm, and though she managed to seal herself away in an impenetrable cocoon, she was still locked away in Malpheus and couldn't communicate to her children. The Worm used his prisoner to take control over the Anansi, but they would try to play the long game and secretly search for their master. Once she was found, they tricked the Garou into believing that if they destroyed the strange cocoon in the middle of Malpheus, it would damage the Worm. They took the bait, but all they managed to do was tear an opening that allowed Ananasa to speak to her children, which upset the Garou. The Anansi slipped into the Umbra to avoid the War of Rage, and they haven't been on talking terms since. Flash forward to Time of Judgment Apocalypse, we have a scenario where the Weaver goes crazy and starts trying to kill everyone by tearing the material world from the Umbra. This kind of situation is not ideal for the Anansi, so after centuries of planning, they go ahead with trying to free Ananasa from Malpheus. Go read Apocalypse for the specifics of that plan, but the actual endgame is to have Ananasa free the Worm as an uncorrupted force and join it in a final battle against the Weaver. Afterwards, Ananasa would take control over the Triad and reshape the world into her vision, wiping out the supernatural and pruning humanity's desire for excess. While perhaps it's not quite the grand scheme that the title's topic might suggest, it is indicative of Ananasa's ambition, and given how loyal the Anansi are to their queen over the Weaver, they might have done this whether or not the Weaver lost its mind. That event only forced them to act now instead of later. The Sword of Null is a powerful artifact of ancient kindred history that was first mentioned in the strangely named Bloody Hearts Diablerie Britain sourcebook. Some 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, there was an Urlon, an Arukr, and a Lantla, all of them Methuselahs. Arukr was the sire of Lantla, and Urlon was a shithead who wanted to kill them both. Arukr went into hiding, and Lantla consulted a demon named Drakonsekir for help. The demon asked for a sword to be built, which is our Sword of Null, and Lantla obliged, but she was immediately possessed by the demon, who still wanted to follow up on her original goals. The possessed Lantla diablerized her sire, killed Urlon, and then went on a rampage until reaching the Tigris River. Lantla started to break free from the possession and drew the demon into her body before chucking the sword into the river. Lantla would go on to become the dreaded Tiamat, who is worth discussion, but not in a video like this. The sword would be rediscovered in 806 CE, before swapping hands numerous times, bouncing from Baghdad to Jerusalem to Vienna to somewhere in the United States, and in Beckett's Jihad diary, apparently Libya, where it found itself in the possession of Beckett. Anyways, just going by the Bloody Heart sourcebook, the players can get into plenty of drama trying to chase a sword that dooms its owners to some kind of horrible fate. It reliably deals a lot of damage, and might have some lingering magic that can be awakened with the right sorceress methods. Back in the 13th century, the Old Thundering gave way to the Shattering as the realms of the Fae were split from the Autumn World. The fairies generally either stayed in their home of Arcadia, or they became changelings as we know them now, by slipping into the bodies of infants. From there, we get the reincarnation cycle that persists into the modern day, so changelings are typically born as such and go through the chrysalis later in life. In the sourcebook, The Enchanted, we see that the Sidhi are an exception to the cycle of rebirth for reasons not wholly understood by the Kathane. Regardless of the specific reason, which is basically just left to storytellers, this means that every Sidhi is the result of a human soul getting swapped out with a Fae soul, and that's what the entry is referring to. In the Chronicles of Darkness rulebook, there is a little sample antagonist in the form of so-called mirror people. These entities live in a mirror world that occasionally connects to our own through observed reflections, and that world gets destroyed whenever the reflection is no longer observed. The mirror people are aware of this, and try to escape the reflections so that they may truly exist. And while their desire might be sympathetic, they are also ruthless, spiteful, and murderous. The town isn't big enough for the two of us, so to speak. The implications are pretty nuts, but the mirror people are just one of the many inexplicable capital H horrors of the Chronicles of Darkness. If you believe that human beings are prisoners of an evil galactic tyrant who bound their souls to exploding volcanoes before recorded history, then the militant auditing division might be dwelling in your midst. This is just Scientology and Mage the Awakening. There's the Banisher sourcebook all about that antagonist type and in a section about their factions. There's the militant auditing division, which is like the inner circle of a church that the writers hesitate to explicitly name the Church of Panography, even though all of its principal beliefs are basically identical to Scientology. Panography is just Dianetics. The founder Levi Bones is just L. Ron Hubbard, down to being called a confidence man by the real-life Aleister Crowley. We even have the Hollywood superstar John Maverick, who, like Tom Cruise, tried to get a start in football before being removed from their teams and then went into acting, and then joined an extremely high-profile, high-control group. So the Chronicles of Darkness has its slightly uncreative spin on the Church of Scientology, but given how aggressive they were in the 2000s with anything that discussed them honestly, I actually kind of respect it. If you want to actually know how the Banisher elements work within the faction, go check out the Banisher sourcebook. As a general principle, the God Machine is hardly talkative. As an entity of cosmic horror, that would defeat the point of its implementation. However, as is much involving the God Machine, the precise reason for its lack of communication is left to storytellers to decide, but several pointers are provided within various sourcebooks, and the idea that the God Machine is dead is one of those explanations. I believe this was introduced in the Contagion Chronicles, though I could be wrong, but it has a special weight here, as this is presented as an explanation for the titular contagion. Among possibilities, such as the God Machine trying to merge realities it is spread across which causes manifestations of the contagion, to the contagion being a force antithetical to the functions of the God Machine, we see the idea that the God Machine is dead, or will die, and that is reverberating backwards through time as the contagion. Though it is an option that can be just ignored, I mention it as it's a somewhat common take on the God Machine that storytellers have run with long before Contagion Chronicles was even released. Though I haven't found anything interesting on the Sasquatch within the Chronicles of Darkness, I have seen this cryptid mentioned a few times in the Worlds of Darkness. The more simple one to explain would be the Lurks, a Soling Kiss introduced in the 20th anniversary edition of Changeling the Dreaming. These guys embody the various big hairy monsters found across the globe, which includes Bigfoot along with the Yeti and countless other beasts of folklore. They make for good mooks and minor antagonists, but they're not as interesting as the older take on the Sasquatch. In Ways of the Wolf for 1st edition Werewolf the Apocalypse, we have Bigfoot and the Hairy Men, which may or may not be related, but they are separated in the book. Bigfoot is a type of great beast which was born of Gaia, predates the creation of the Garou, and typically dwells in the Umbra. Beyond its nature as a great beast, it's a giant fuck-off monkey, so moving on to the more interesting Hairy Men, well, these are also giant fuck-off monkeys, but they're also pretty chill. They have neutral relations with the Garou and try to keep to themselves out of principle, but the coming apocalypse is putting pressure on them, which is why they might show up in a chronicle. There's a lot of mysteries around these guys, but so is the Bigfoot of legend. In Exalted, Autochthon is a primordial that rebelled against the gods, lost, became paranoid, and ran off with several of his followers to a different plane of reality to rule over its own world. It was also an embodiment of order and science. Most of this is detailed in the Time of Tumult sourcebook. In various Mage the Ascension sourcebooks going as far back as the Book of Worlds, which predates Exalted's Time of Tumult book by about 6 years, we are told about Autochthania, the Shenty of the Weaver, which Iteration X has decided to settle on. We have two conflicting origin stories between the Book of Worlds and Convention Book Iteration X, but the second one is far more relevant when talking about the Exalted connection, especially as Time of Tumult came out at the same date as the Convention book. Back when Iteration X were the Artificers as part of the Order of Reason, the Void Engineers found a giant polyhedron floating in orbit. Exploration revealed that there was a sentient computer inside, which we know as the computer, and given that it was the late 19th century, the Artificers were pretty freaked out, but in a mostly positive way. They started to use this newfound realm as a testing ground, and that's kind of how we get Iteration X as we know them today. What isn't known to the technocracy is that the computer was a spirit which has dwelled in Autochthоnia for innumerable ages, and was separated from our world due to an unspecified disaster. In that time, it was served by human and machine slaves until they died off. It was left alone for tens of thousands of years, and then the Artificers showed up. Putting the pieces together, and considering that Exalted was originally presented as a kind of ancient past for the World of Darkness, Revised Edition's Autochthоnia is just Autochthon if you pressed fast forward. I will also throw in the additional topic of the God Machine from Chronicles being Autochthоnia if you either kept going forward or just as a different incarnation, but there is less to say on this one. It's mostly an idea for fans of the two settings to have fun with. The convention of the progenitors are capable of extending lifespans of humans, and have done so with various important figures. I mention this because the Isaac Newton of our world died in 1727, but the one mentioned in Technocracy Void Engineers was, quote, knocked off by a Euthanatos mobster in the 20s. How quickly the book glazes over this reveal is kind of the point. In the classic World of Darkness, I guess we all know that the Weaver decided to imprison the worm which drove it mad. But how did one part of the triad that was in balance with the other find the power to do this? Well, the Breed book for the Korax lets us into their perspective on ancient history, and it turns out that Raven was such a good listener that the Weaver and the Worm turned to it when something was on their mind. One of these discussions brought the problem of the Weaver being frustrated with the Worm destroying its creations to Raven's attention. Raven's bright idea was to have the primordial forces alternate in power every once in a while, starting with the Weaver. The first thing the Weaver did was imprison the Worm, and things started to go wrong from there. If you wanted to blame something other than the Weaver imprisoning the Worm or the Garou ending the Impergium, I guess you could blame Raven, and that might be the most correct stance. There is the chance of some unimaginable conflict between the two parts of the triad if Raven didn't throw in some idea, or that the Worm would have abused this opportunity if it went first, but those are hypothetical. We know what happened when the Weaver took control, and it sucked for everyone. In the Ferris Fowl scenario for Times of Judgment Gehenna, Lilith comes back to claim vengeance on Cain, and she has the support of 7 antediluvians, which are referred to as the Apostates. It was always all but certain that there were more than 13 antediluvians, and the extras we get here are pretty interesting. There are few better places to get inspiration for what the missing antediluvians could be, so I'll run through them real quick. Lucien has a kind of masculine majesty thing going on, as a proud leader whose very presence enthralls the minds of others. He has affinities for animalism, obfuscate, and presence, and the book opens the possibility of him being connected to Absimiliard. Erini is unsurprisingly a wrathful and resolute woman with a fixation on vengeance to the point of impulsiveness. She has affinities for celerity, potence, and necromancy. One might make a connection to Clan Brujah, but Troil complicates that connection and the book doesn't suggest it. Meket was an ancient mage who adapted to the Embrace to become a master of kindred sorcery, but he is held back by his curse that doesn't just give him the appearance of a corpse, but causes his body to actively rot. He has affinities for all disciplines related to blood magic and auspics. I will take the opportunity here to mention that both Lucien and Meket were mentioned as potential lost antediluvians back in the 1st edition core rulebook for Vampire the Masquerade. Ikopabe is not just profoundly inhuman in everything but his figure, but is also shrouded in mystery. His behavior is almost primal, and the only reason he's around the other apostates is because he trusts Lilith. He has affinities for animalism, fortitude, and protean, which are identical to the gangrel disciplines. It seems that he and Anoia just arrived at similar conclusions. Ilias is just the Brujah antediluvian. He escaped diablerie through Use Temporis and ended up in Lilith's Garden. He now has a grudge for all of his descendants, with the true Brujah being students of his that were embraced into Troil's bloodline, and then learned Temporis. Malachi is the twin sister of Malkav who took to the curse of madness far worse, but has found comfort in Lilith's company. While I think she's been mentioned before, I know for certain that she was brought back a few times in 20th Anniversary Edition, and even in 5th edition as the subject of a mysterious cult. She has affinities for Auspex, Obfuscate, and a unique discipline called Phantasm which combines parts of Dementation and Chemistry. Unfortunately, she has little control over these powers. Akos is a trickster who has gone through so many disguises but whose true form is utterly repulsive. The mystery surrounding them has gone so deep that they might be the Crone, and not even the other apostates trust them. They have an affinity for all forms of blood magic, obfuscate, presence, dominate, and even Melpomene, a discipline that's really only associated with the Daughters of Cacophony. So those are the 7 apostate antediluvians. Use them in the Fair is Foul scenario, or go nuts and use them in homebrew. Are the 5th edition resources for Clan La Sombra a little too steeped in shadows for your taste? Would your chronicle benefit from an abyss so vast and terrifying that your little kindred starts to wonder why the hell they ever wanted to become one of the keepers? Have you ever wondered where the backrooms fit into your political power struggles? Embrace the darkness with Clanbook La Sombra, the latest of the ever-incredible Grey Gecko clan books for 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade. This most appreciated edition features 51 new powers themed to Clan La Sombra, 54 new merits and flaws, 12 lore sheets, 6 bloodlines, and so much more, including options for Sabbat Chronicles. Push through the curse to become a La Sombra hacker, unleash the abyss with violent beasts and ravenous maws, or master the Fey-influenced arts of Aposia. These Umbral wonders and so much more are supported by incredible illustrations and finely detailed lore. Command the shadows, crush the opposition, and conquer proudly with Clanbook La Sombra. Available on DriveThruRPG and Storyteller's Vault for $9.99 USD, with a limited free version also available. For use with Sabbat Chronicles, it is recommended to consult the Black Hand Playing the Sabbat, which costs $25 USD, is available on DriveThruRPG and Storyteller's Vault, and is not to be confused with The Sword of Cain, a V5 guide to the Sabbat, Guide to the Sabbat, or Sabbat the Schism lore book. My complaints regarding Paradox's decision to heavily discourage playing Sabbat Chronicles will be saved for another time. I will once again disclose that I am followed by the Great Gecko Games accounts on Twitter and Blue Sky, but that's because they know what's good, and so do I. While Vampire the Requiem tends to not be too certain with origin stories for the vampires, the clan books did offer some history and preferred narratives for the clans. What is possibly the most bizarre origin story, unsurprisingly, goes to the Meket, and while I haven't read their clan book in full, I believe I got to the relevant passage. In a moment where a Meket begins to plummet through the collective memory of the clan, flying from the Crusades to ancient Rome to ancient Egypt, until finally going back as far as possible. That's when we get the following excerpt. I wait in a cave. I am cold and alien and before words, and the voices outside show the tall ones, who with unfamiliar sounds, deliberate over stopping for the night. I hiss and begin to croon. They need only walk into the shadow. My tentacles and blades will grasp them and embrace them and make them my food. If I were to go through the whole book, which didn't really hook me as the Nosferatu are the only Requiem clan I give a shit about, I might find more relevant details, but this does paint a strange picture. A natural form with tentacles and blades, not to mention the quote-unquote tall ones, which are implied to have existed before humanity. Ultimately, it's all in the past and probably not worth worrying about. The Testament of Longinus is a collection of texts that are supplemental to Vampire the Requiem, specifically the Lancia et Sanctum, who claim Longinus, the man who stabbed the crucified Jesus Christ, to be a vampire who was cursed for his transgression. One can think of this as Requiem's equivalent of the Book of Nod or the Chronicle of the Black Labyrinth. And while this book is pretty loaded, even at just 90 pages, the Sanctified have no greater claim to the truth than any other faction. They're just the ones who work best with this kind of book, compared to the Carthians or Invictus. The Order of Dracul does have the Rites of the Dragon, though that book is considerably less dramatic than this one, especially in its implications. The book itself is split into 5 parts, which are supplemented by additional notes and 3 appendices. It is all allegedly written by Longinus, or at least someone transcribing his tale, but much like the actual Bible, it has been filtered through different authors and translators. The first 4 parts are what should be expected if you know what the Lancia et Sanctum is all about, and unsurprisingly, Longinus was a monster. The 5th part goes wild with mentions of several things that are not vampires, coming from prophecies bestowed onto Longinus by a maybe angel thing. It's all crossover fuel, and I'll try to explain it, but I might get some stuff wrong as I am also interpreting vague prophecies here. We get mentions of the Strix being divinely ordained agents sent to punish vampires, a conflict between the Moon tribes and the Pure tribes, in which the Pure tribes win, a final judgment for Prometheans where all are consumed by torment but 5 are spared to become humans, changelings storming Arcadia to overthrow the true Fae, and the Exarchs probably killing God. I might be wrong on that last one because this is supposed to be a prophecy and the Exarchs ascending to the supernal realms happened in the past, but that is a common interpretation. Also, the Geists are here, but they don't really do anything interesting. The funniest part about that last section of the book is that each time Longinus is confused about what the angel is showing him, the angel just says, "This is not for you to understand, this is only for you to set down, that others might understand," which suggests that it is up to the Lancia et Sanctum to let other supernaturals know about their prophecies. It's kind of strange and interesting in equal parts, and the book could probably do without it, but that whole last part is mostly why I wanted to mention it here. In the Geralt book, we learn of a werebear named Arturus who was a 6th century tribe leader in Britain who was eventually brought down, and is rumored to come back during a time of need. Arturus is just a less than creative take on King Arthur, but I guess it got published, so it works as a fun fact. Not sure how the Avalon guys in the Technocracy would feel about this though. In a few Mage the Ascension sourcebooks, there was mention of an old faction called the Ixoi, who were awakened assassins that mingled with Euthanatoi and were involved in the Trojan War. In the Ascension Time of Judgment book, their history is laid out a lot more clearly. It turns out that the Ixoi were a secret order of mages that got their start as slaves for infernalists, that passed their teachings from one generation to the next. The rather convenient awakenings were thanks to psychopomps, a kind of spirit I talked about in the actual Iceberg videos that could manipulate avatars, bring avatars to mages, and may or may not be interdimensional aliens. Some of these spirits would merge with mages to become Anakim, and though most perished from the stress of the merger, this boon allowed the mages to finally revolt against the infernalists. In the ruins of their master cities, they would find the Knife of Ixion. This blade is supposedly a fragment of the first focus, which was used to execute the first murder, which all but explicitly suggests that Cain was awakened before becoming the first vampire. In the modern day, the Knife of Ixios would end up in the possession of the Void Engineers as it was an extremely potent wonder. It likely ended up with them after the original Ixoi scattered into the traditions and technocracy. Also, in this Time of Judgment scenario, the Void Engineers may or may not have used the Blade of Ixion to fuck off into another universe, and given the circumstances, good for them. While I don't think it's ever been simply explained, the worm is presented through different faces in the different games. Whether it's Entropy and Mage, the Fomorians and Changeling, Oblivion and Wraith, or whatever, it's mostly a matter of perspective, and the mummy saw this primordial force as Apophis, but that was not always the case. In the Midnight Circus sourcebook, which I talked more about in the main Iceberg, it said that the founder had to balance the favor of Apophis and the worm. This was in 1996, and the Mummy the Resurrection core rulebook was published in 2001, which doesn't do much to clearly differentiate the two entities, but there is material to see them as the same entity or two different entities. It's just that with the second case, there is little that can be said about Apophis as its own entity. It has capital B Bane mummies as servants after all, so I'm pretty sure White Wolf always had an answer in mind. In Changeling the Lost, at some point the Hedge and cyberspace manage to make contact with each other, which births a whole realm that reflects cyberspace, but still functions under the logic of the Hedge. This means that while it does look like a somewhat futuristic city, there are still hobgoblins that represent files or computer viruses. It is also only accessible through the Hedge with no stable means of two-way travel, so no changelings have actually settled there. This is all mostly detailed in the Kiss and Kin sourcebook, with some additional information in the Oak, Ash, and Thorn Companion. Before I dig into this one, I should mention that this is perhaps the most speculative entry, but I think it's a fun one. So, it is somewhat clear that awakened magi were more common in the past, as most of the obstructions to awakening have really only come up in the last 1,000 years or so, such as the disappearance of the psychopomps and the Order of Reason's ascent to power. This makes it unsurprising that some antediluvians were mages before becoming part of the third generation, and due to the potent blood, the Gilgul wasn't as much of a loss as it would be from turning a mage into a 12th generation fledgling. This fact, along with making a few inferences about some of the antediluvians before their embrace, makes it appear that some of them might have been mages. Getting the easy ones out of the way, Tremere has been clearly stated to have been a mage. Augustus Giovanni might have been one as well, though it's equally possible, if not more likely, that he was a sorcerer. The more interesting ones are Cappadocius and Hakim. Cappadocius was known to have been profoundly fascinated by the nature of death, and a common belief about his pre-embrace life was that he was a mystic of sorts. If we factor in his post-embrace idea of diablerizing God and ascending to his divinity, it does sound like a perverse kind of ascension, which might have been retained from his past interests. It could also be seen as something he developed entirely after the embrace, and given how erratic his final nights were, that possibility should be considered. As for Hakim, he was by all accounts one of the deadliest warriors that has ever walked the earth, especially when considering the accounts from his own clan. If we take the tale of him embracing himself with the blood of several ancient vampires that he killed by himself, a feat that would make a lot more sense if he was some kind of mage, then we can suppose that he could have put some true magic into the ritual, just as Tremere did for his own self-embrace. If we follow the account that he simply fell in line with Cain, then there is little reason to assume that he would be a mage. As War of the Apocalypse goes bonkers with umbral realms and spirits, so you can go fuck up dinosaurs and Slenderman in Krynos form, which you can find in page 81 of the 1993 version of the Velvet Shadow, and page 137 of the 20th anniversary edition of the Velvet Shadow respectively, the 1993 version of that source book provides us with a sub-realm for the Cyber Realm, where it's always TV time. The television realm is the umbral reflection of everything broadcast on television, held together by individual sets so you can walk from one show to another. This section is also where we learn that the Garou can apparently be hypnotized by televisions, and the problem is so bad that the Fianna avoid watching TV altogether. Unfortunately, this subrealm did not return in 20th anniversary's version of the Velvet Shadow. In the Mummy Player's Guide, there is a 7-point flaw for Capacocha mummies of the South American Inca civilization, where they are either a child of incest or are in an incestuous relationship. This results in them periodically turning into a benign animal such as an ox, moose, or llama, and the character now has a dark secret. I actually tried to see if this was tied to an ancient superstition, but it appears not, and the White Wolf guys just made this with their own minds. As mentioned in Lore of the Bloodlines for 20th Anniversary Edition, and the Harbingers of Ashur lore sheet for 5th edition, a few kindred in the Harbingers of Skulls are not simply vampires. They are in fact wraiths possessing the bodies of Harbingers. This isn't entirely a problem for the Bloodline, as their expertise can provide substantial contributions, but it's also something they don't want outsiders to know about. These possessed Harbingers also have greater resistance to mental manipulations, and still suffer all the burdens of the blood. This character option comes as a 6-point merit in Lore of the Bloodlines and a 4-dot lore sheet in the Player's Guide and the Cults of the Blood God sourcebooks. In the Compacts and Conspiracy sourcebook for Hunter the Vigil, the opening bit of fiction reveals the recently created Project Einherjar, which aims to kill off hunters that are considered a liability or threat to Task Force Valkyrie and the United States. It isn't much more fleshed out than this, and does make a lot of sense with the initial presentation of Task Force Valkyrie being controlled by vampires, which is made explicitly clear in Compacts and Conspiracies. I don't think this plot point has been picked up again, but it is a lot of food for thought when using Task Force Valkyrie in a chronicle, especially as antagonists. In 1908, a massive explosion occurred near the Podkamennaya Tunguska River in Russia, with its strength comparable to that of a hydrogen bomb. This would go on to be known as the Tunguska event, and would be attributed to an asteroid that exploded in the sky. However, due to the events occurring in such an isolated region, and the eyewitness accounts being rather surreal, White Wolf had a bit of fun with the hidden truth behind the explosion. Interestingly enough, they decided to go with two completely different explanations for two different game lines nearly 20 years apart. In Rage Across Russia, a passage simply attributes the event to a battle between a dream speaker and a Zemei, a kind of dragon that has been corrupted to serve the worm. These beasts are named after a dragon from Russian folklore, and are really only relevant in Rage Across Russia, but it does pull from Mage the Ascension's understanding of dragons as bygone creatures. In convention book Void Engineers, the Pan-Dimensional Corps found an alien spaceship floating past the asteroid belt. Apparently then, some poking and prodding resulted in the ship firing a miniature black hole at Tunguska. I find both explanations kind of lame, especially the second one, but those are some possibilities for the World of Darkness. In the first edition Book of the Worm, the real-life Mir space station is presented as an important hive for the Black Spiral Dancers, as it connects directly to Malpheus. The dancers get there via Moonbridge, and Delirium keeps their presence a secret to the rest of the world. Also, White Wolf seems to have thought that Mir was an acronym because it's always written in all caps, when it's just a Russian word. Anyways, in 2001, the space station was deorbited and destroyed during atmospheric re-entry, which was probably a little inconvenient for the Black Spiral Dancers. Before getting into the Abbot, it should be mentioned that embracing non-humans is generally impossible, with the exception of the Bali founders, who, according to legend, were a kind of proto-human mistake of God. With that in mind, Berlin by Night gives us the Abbot, which are 15 cobras embraced by the set-type Methuselah Nefertiti. They have disciplines, vampiric weaknesses, and everything. This actually opens a bit of old world darkness weirdness, which should be unsurprising for anyone who has read Berlin by Night, because this book tells us that animals can be embraced, and it's just taboo to do so, but future editions would walk this back and restrict the curse to only be effective on humans. For a final honorary mention, I have on numerous occasions heard of the were-coyotes attacking the Void Engineers and infiltrating their ships to redirect them away from protected sites. This has led to them encountering more hostile entities and environments, which is less than inspiring for the convention. I have looked into Rage Across the Heavens, the Nuisha book, and the 2 Void Engineers books, but I have been unable to find where this comes from. It's possible I've missed it in those books, or it's in another book, but if you know where this comes from, please do share in the comments. Now, that's another load of fun trivia for the World of Darkness. Or at least I thought it was kind of fun. There is certainly still more I could go into, especially for the Chronicles of Darkness, which I'm less confident in my knowledge of, but between the Iceberg videos and this, it's enough for me to feel secure in moving on from basic trivia. From here on out, I want to talk about more specific topics while leaving fundamentals such as vampire clans, sects, or covenants to other YouTubers. Your Glue Boys, Burger Kriegs, Holdenberries, and whoever else. I also won't always talk about the World of Darkness, as should be very apparent by now, but I think I'm done here for tonight. You can subscribe for more nonsense on the spooky to strange spectrum, or follow my Blue Sky for irregular updates on videos, unrelated projects, and misadventures. Lastly, if you do play 5th edition Vampire the Masquerade and like Clan La Sombra as much as I do, then please check out Grey Gecko's clan book on them. I am sure you'll love it. And with all of that said, I have been Ignacio Vitalis. Thank you for watching. I hope that's the outro I'm going to stick with for the foreseeable future, and may the night treat you right.